unforgettable night at the old missionary compound. My sister was always the adventurous type. When she told me about a trip her women's college in Chennai was planning, I didn't think much of it. It was 1998, and a group of around 40 girls, including my sister, were heading to Bangalore, Mysore, and the surrounding areas for a field trip. She seemed excited until she came back. Her face was pale, her eyes haunted. I pressed her to tell me what happened, and after much coaxing she finally opened up. Her story has stayed with me ever since, echoing in my thoughts every time I close my eyes. The trip started like any other. They visited a few tourist spots, took photographs, and shared laughter. But on the third night, everything changed. They decided to stay in a dormitory that was part of an old British-era missionary compound in Mysore. My sister described it as one of those places with an eerie quietness to it, where the wind seemed to whisper secrets through the trees. The compound itself was vast, with an ancient cemetery tucked away in a corner, surrounded by rusting wrought iron gates. The headstones were covered in moss, and the names of those long gone had nearly faded away. It felt like the dead were silently watching them. The girls took their assigned dormitory, which had 40 beds lined up in 2 rows. It was already dark by the time they settled in. The wardens, 4 middle-aged women who had accompanied them, ensured everyone was comfortable before switching off the lights. The night was still, save for the occasional rustle of leaves outside. Everyone soon drifted into a deep sleep. Then, at around 1 a.m., a blood-curdling scream pierced the silence, the kind of scream that makes your blood run cold. My sister jolted awake, her heart pounding in her chest. The scream had come from somewhere outside, or so it seemed. The wardens quickly turned on the lights, their faces white with fear. They checked the dormitory, and then stepped outside to question the watchman, but he had heard nothing unusual. After a tense few minutes, they turned the lights off and returned to bed, though no one really felt safe. 15 minutes later, just as they were beginning to calm down, there was a loud thud, followed by the same chilling scream. This time, it was closer. It echoed through the room, sending a wave of panic through everyone. The lights came on again. My sister could see the terror in her friend's eyes, mirroring her own fear. The wardens searched the room, again finding nothing. They tried to reassure the girls, but the comfort felt hollow. They all huddled together, whispering nervously, waiting for morning to come. That's when one of the girls noticed something odd. Her friend, lying in the adjacent bed, hadn't moved at all. Not during the screams, not during the commotion, nothing. She was just lying there, staring blankly at the ceiling. My sister told me that it was as if her friend was frozen in time. Concerned, she called everyone over. They tried to shake her awake, but she was rigid, unresponsive. Her eyes were open, but they seemed to look right through them, as if she was trapped in some kind of waking nightmare. Everyone's attention was now on the girl. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, didn't react to anything around her. The fear in the room was palpable. It clung to the air like a thick fog. My sister said she had never felt terror like that in her life. It was as if the darkness of the place had seeped into their very souls. As the hours dragged on, the wardens decided that it was best to keep the lights on and wait for dawn. When the first light of day finally crept through the windows, the entire group was relieved beyond words. But the girl still hadn't moved. Her expression was blank, her breathing shallow. It was clear that something was very, very wrong. They decided to call off the trip and head back to Chennai immediately. When they arrived, The girl's parents were there waiting, their faces a mixture of worry and confusion. They took her away, and my sister told me that was the last time she saw her friend. Days later, rumors began to spread. The girl's parents had come to the college, demanding answers. They blamed the school for not taking better care of their daughter. But what could the school have done? No one could explain what had happened to her that night. The girl never returned to college. Some said she had lost her mind, that she was never the same again. Others whispered that she had been possessed by something in that old compound. I tried to rationalize the story, to find a logical explanation for it all. But the more I thought about it, the more it haunted me. Was it really a spirit from the old cemetery that had latched onto her? Was it the place itself, its history, its secrets, that had driven her to madness? Or was it just a case of fragile nerves breaking under stress? I don't know. All I know is that my sister was never the same after that night. She still wakes up sometimes, drenched in sweat, the echo of that scream ringing in her ears. And I can't help but wonder about the girl. What happened to her after all these years? Did she ever find peace? Or is she still trapped in whatever nightmare began that night? If anyone reading this knows more about the place, or what happened to that girl, I urge you to come forward. It's been over 20 years, but the question still lingers. What really happened in that old missionary compound? And why, even now, does it still send shivers down my spine to think about it?
The Curse of the House on Haunted Grounds. I swear to you, every word of this is true. I've tried to forget, but some things just linger in your mind like a bad smell. It started when my family and I moved to this town. We needed a place quickly, and as luck, or rather misfortune, would have it, we found a house that was available. It seemed perfect at first, a 2-story with a sunroom, plenty of space for our growing family. A friend of a friend was moving out, so we took over the lease. But almost immediately, things began to feel off. You know that feeling when something isn't quite right, but you can't put your finger on it? That was the first red flag. The house had this strange layout. The second floor didn't cover the whole house, just one side of it, and there was this narrow walkway that connected the bedrooms, overlooking the living and dining areas below. The sunroom, which we thought would be a wonderful place to relax, quickly became a place we avoided like the plague. It felt wrong, like stepping into a trap. At night, it would creak and groan, but it wasn't the settling noises of an old house. It was almost as if it was alive, whispering and sighing in the dark. We never went out there after sunset. One of the bedrooms upstairs had a door that led out to a small balcony in the sunroom. Every night, without fail, that door would rattle like someone was trying to force it open. At first I thought it was just the wind, but then we started hearing footsteps above us. I checked everywhere but found nothing. The attic access was in the closet of that same room, and every time I went up there, the air was thick, heavy, as if something was pushing down on my shoulders. The other bedroom wasn't any better. At night, it sounded like a woman was screaming. We never saw her, but we could hear her, her voice filled with terror and pain. The whole place gave us the feeling of being watched. I know it sounds crazy, but wherever we went, there was this sensation, like eyes following our every move. It got so bad that we stopped going upstairs altogether. We closed all the doors on the second floor and decided to sleep in the master bedroom downstairs. All of us cramped into one room, just to avoid the horrors lurking above. The living room had a patio door that opened into the sunroom. For some reason, nobody had ever put up curtains on it. I thought that was odd, considering the strange vibe of the place, so we hung a heavy sheet as a makeshift curtain until we could get proper ones. There was a streetlight right outside, and at night, shadows would play across the fabric. It was unnerving, the way they seemed to morph into people, shapes of things flying across it. We didn't dare look out there, didn't have the courage to see what might be lurking in the dark. One night, I fell asleep on the couch in the living room. I woke up in the middle of the night, feeling cold, and when I opened my eyes, I saw him, a man hanging by his neck from the walkway railing above me. He was just there, swaying slightly, staring right at me. My heart was in my throat, and I couldn't move. Our dog was standing next to the couch, his hackles raised, a low growl rumbling from his chest, and my cat was puffed up, hissing at the same spot. But the thing that chilled me to the bone was the look on the hanging man's face. His eyes were empty, hollow, but his mouth was twisted into a sick grin, as if he enjoyed my fear. I blinked, just once, and he was gone. Our dog, normally calm and obedient, started acting out. He would disappear for days, only to return exhausted, covered in dirt. It was like he was being lured away, taken somewhere we couldn't follow. Then there was the paper boy. He became fixated on our house, on me, always hanging around, watching. I didn't understand why until one day I walked the dog on the other side of the fence, into the empty lot next to our house. There, I found a pile of smoked cigarettes and footprints in the dirt, right where someone would stand to look through the sunroom windows and the patio door into our living room. Whoever it was, they had been watching us, watching me. It all came to a head when a friend needed a place to stay. She didn't want to crowd into the master bedroom with us, so she tried sleeping in the living room. The next morning she looked pale, shaken. She had seen the hanging man, too. I hadn't told her anything about it. Then she tried the sunroom, but something kept waking her up. Strange noises, something brushing against her skin in the dark. She finally tried one of the bedrooms upstairs, but that didn't go any better. She had a nightmare of a man leaning over her, whispering for her to get out of his house. When she described him, we all knew. It was the same man we had all seen in our dreams. The same man who hung himself from that railing. We did some digging, desperate for answers. It turns out the house had a dark history. The previous owner had lost his job, fallen into debt, and on the day before he was supposed to be evicted, he hung himself from the very same balcony. His girlfriend came over, found him hanging there, and in a panic, tried to cut him down. She tripped, fell over the railing, hit the dining table, and broke her neck. Died instantly. The scream we heard, it was hers. A neighbor walking his dog heard it and called the police, who found them both dead. And as if that wasn't enough, we learned the land itself was cursed. It had been an Indian burial ground, then a cemetery. They moved the cemetery, but the caskets wouldn't stay buried, kept popping up through the ground. It was like the earth itself was rejecting the dead. And then they built this house on it, this house that just invited evil. We didn't stay long after that. I don't know what became of the place, but sometimes I find myself hoping it burns to the ground. Some places are just cursed, you know. Some places are meant to stay forgotten. Whispers of the forgotten. I never believed in ghosts. Not really, anyway. Sure, I'd heard the stories. Who hasn't? But they were just tales told to spook kids or entertain thrill seekers. At least, that's what I thought, until I took the job as a night watchman at Pine Hill Cemetery. The first few weeks were uneventful. The cemetery was vast, stretching across acres of quiet land, the tombstones casting long shadows under the moonlight. It was a lonely job, but it paid well, and I needed the money. My duties were simple: patrol the grounds, make sure there were no vandals or intruders, and report anything unusual. Easy enough, right? That night started like any other. I was halfway through my shift, walking my usual route between the rows of gravestones. The air was cool, and the only sounds were the soft rustle of leaves and the distant call of an owl. I remember glancing at my watch. It was just after midnight. That's when I heard it. At first it was just a faint whisper, barely audible. I stopped in my tracks, listening intently. The whispering grew louder, more distinct. I could hear my name, Michael. Michael. Carried on the wind. I felt a chill run down my spine. I tried to brush it off, convincing myself it was just the wind playing tricks on me. But the whispers persisted, growing louder and more insistent. Michael. Michael. I spun around, shining my flashlight in every direction. Nothing. No one was there. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. Just the wind, I muttered to myself, but my voice sounded shaky even to my own ears. Then, without warning, I felt a force slam into me, knocking me to the ground. My flashlight flew from my hand, rolling away into the darkness. I gasped, struggling to catch my breath, my heart pounding in my chest. I scrambled to my feet, frantically searching for whatever or whoever had attacked me. But there was nothing, no one. Just the stillness of the cemetery. I grabbed my flashlight, my hands trembling as I switched it back on. The whispers had stopped, but the air felt heavy, almost suffocating. I felt a deep, primal fear rising inside me. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Something was there, watching me, waiting. I bolted. I didn't care about my shift or the job anymore. I just wanted out. I sprinted across the grounds, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands still shaking. Finally, I got the door open and jumped inside, slamming the door behind me. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. I sped out of the cemetery, not daring to look back. For days, I tried to convince myself it was all in my head. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew what I'd experienced was real, and I knew I couldn't just let it go. So a week later, I went back. I arrived just before sunset, determined to face whatever it was that had terrorized me. I made my way to the spot where it all happened, my flashlight in hand. The cemetery was eerily quiet, the shadows growing longer as the sun dipped below the horizon. As I stood there, I felt a cold breeze wash over me. The whispers started again, faint at first, then louder. "Michael! Michael!" I turned slowly, shining my flashlight into the darkness. My heart was racing, but this time I refused to run. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty grounds. "Show yourself!" For a moment, there was only silence. Then I saw it. A dark figure, standing by a tombstone, partially obscured by the shadows. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was tall, shrouded in darkness, its features indistinguishable. I took a step forward, my flashlight trained on the figure. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, watching me. Then, slowly, it began to fade, dissolving into the darkness. I blinked, and it was gone. Just like that. I stood there, stunned, trying to process what I'd just seen. Was it a trick of the light? A shadow? But I knew better. I'd seen it with my own eyes. I wasn't alone in that cemetery, not by a long shot. I started visiting Pine Hill more frequently, determined to uncover the truth. I spoke with other visitors, other workers, anyone who'd been there after dark. I wasn't the only one who'd seen things. There were stories of figures appearing near graves, of voices whispering in the wind, of cold spots and sudden chills. And then there was the story of the grieving widow. She visited her late husband's grave regularly, always in the late afternoon, just before dusk. She'd noticed a dark figure standing near his tombstone, watching her. She thought it was just another mourner and approached to offer her condolences. But as she got closer, the figure vanished. She'd dismissed it at first, thinking it was just her imagination. But it kept happening. Every time she visited, the figure was there, always a little closer. She described feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, a feeling that something wasn't right. I asked around, trying to find out more. That's when I heard about the teenagers. A group of them had snuck into the cemetery one night on a dare. They brought a Ouija board, hoping to make contact with the dead. They claimed the board started moving on its own, spelling out messages they couldn't understand. Then, the temperature dropped suddenly, and they heard footsteps approaching. Their flashlights flickered, and they saw a ghostly apparition moving towards them. They ran, leaving everything behind. When they returned the next day, they found the Ouija board shattered into pieces. After hearing their stories, I realized Pine Hill was more than just a cemetery. It was a place where the veil between the living and the dead was thin, where spirits roamed, trapped between worlds. I still don't know who or what called my name that night. I don't know what force knocked me to the ground, or what dark figure watched me from the shadows. But one thing is certain: Pine Hill is not a place for the faint of heart. It's a place where the dead may rest, but their spirits, they're far from peaceful. So if you ever find yourself near Pine Hill Cemetery after dark, listen closely. You might hear the whispers too, and if you do, don't ignore them, because you might not be alone. And that, my friends, is my story. A story of a skeptic turned believer, a story of whispers in the dark. Remember, the dead may be silent, but their stories, they speak louder than ever. Stay safe and sleep well if you can.